Hello to myself and everybody else. So far today, I'm making a review on another art book, and this one is called 50 Manga Babes to Draw and Paint. So far, looking at the book, at the contents, so far the book starts off with like the first part of the book being about like techniques, such as the tools and materials, and then it goes into certain kind of tools and materials as well, such as like colored pencils, markers, watercolors, then how to combine the media, create great line art, great digital, like basic tips for making stuff digital, choosing color palettes, proportion and scale, and then clothing and accessories. And then the whole other second part of the book basically just shows a bunch of different examples of how to draw different characters, such as, and it's split up into like different sections in the contents for this, basically just with different categories such as fan favorites, warrior women, Japanese traditions, street fashion, fantasy, girls next door, career girls, and super cute. And then after that, it goes into the index and the credits. So far, looking at the beginning of the book, basically there's an inspiration part of the book, which basically just gives like a different list of like movies, manga, artists, books, different things you can kind of just like get inspiration from, to just like watch, check out, and everything like that to basically inspire your art. So far, the list is pretty interesting on the stuff they have here. So far, this book is from 2008, so a lot of the suggestions will probably be like a bit older, but again, still pretty decent suggestions. So far, it even has like Japanese words to know, which again gives the word and definition. So far, again, something pretty interesting for different terms to learn if you don't know. The next page about the tools and material. So far, again, it basically just gives you the general, tools you can use, such as erasers, papers, pencil sharpener, markers, watercolors, different tools like that. But a thing I do find interesting about this is that with the material they recommend, they actually do recommend like name brand stuff. So they don't just kind of say buy colored pencils just like generically. They'll actually give you like a brand name of colored pencil they recommend. Same thing with like markers and even inks and watercolors and paints, which is pretty interesting as well because most books would just say markers, they can be used to draw, and then just leave it at that. But this, it actually suggests something to use, so you can just like do more research and look into things that might interest you, which I think is like a pretty cool thing. So for the next page goes into colored pencils, where with the colored pencils, it does give like pretty good suggestions for how to use them, as well as different kinds of colored pencils that work good with water or work good on their own, which ones are kind of rough and everything. It also gives suggestions for erasing, blending, shading, just a lot of like different suggestions that could be very useful for somebody who's like new to coloring. And the next page is marker rendering, which basically has the same thing of like blending and different kinds of markers, such as like felt tips or like really fine tipped markers and everything like that. So far, it does give, again, suggestions of brands to use. It even references this book for like pages to see examples of them using it on some of the characters later on. And it even has pictures of like the different kind of like tipped markers and how they kind of come out and what you can use them for. Again, also like really good information. On the watercolors, it gives information such as like what kind of paper to use, how to prepare the paper, how like the different brushes work with the paper, and how to like get everything set up so your picture comes out pretty smooth. Gives pretty good advice for watercolors. And the next page of combining media. So far with this page, it gives pretty good information on basically if you're using colored pencils, pens, pencil, paint, like all of them together, and basically tells you what would be pretty good to work with each other, what will smear if you use water or ink over it. So far, it gives a lot of pretty decent advice, which again is very interesting to read as well. So for any kind of tool you might be interested in using, it does have good information that is probably pretty useful to read. So far, the next part about creating great line art, basically this one is just kind of telling you like what kind of different pencils do, like the 2H, the H, the B, like just those kind of different kinds of like graphite pencils, which one comes out darker, lighter, pretty good for sketching. It also gives you definitions of like what a rough sketch is, what a cleaned up sketch is, and on the other page it gives you like ideas for inking, where it's like again using digital or just doing it by hand, transferring it over. Like again, it gives pretty good information and tips on both parts. Basically, if I had to say the drawing with pencil, again, it's kind of just kind of like, again, pretty quick. Mostly gives you more suggestions on what kind of pencils to use rather than how to sketch in general. But again, just a pretty quick little thing that can be useful for mostly like supplies and everything like that. Same thing with the inking. It can give you some suggestions on if you rather use like do it by hand or if you rather like do it digitally. So again, also something pretty interesting to look at. The next page on basically the digital tips and all that. Basically all these are tips for, it gives like 20 tips. Basically they're all tips for using Photoshop, but it also does give some suggestions of other websites for like working with black and white digital and other things like that. Again, this book is from 2008, so I have no idea if most of these websites are still a thing, such as like Open Canvas or Comic Works or Manga Studio. I have no idea if they're like still a thing, but I mean, so far most of the advice on here is just like you can probably transfer it over to just any kind of like Photoshop tool. So again, it does give pretty good suggestions if you can just translate this over to a different software that basically works with Photoshop. So again, something that can be pretty good advice for people as well. So far, the other part basically talks about choosing a color palette, and basically it talks about how a lot of people make like manga or anime basically prefer using like bold, strong colors, such as like, you know, a bright red, yellow, blue, something like that to basically draw attention to the character. But it says like other stuff too for like more adult themes. You can use like more toned down or muted colors. And basically talks about like just light and vibrant palettes as like one example here, kind of just showing what can really be done with that. And then the other side basically shows like a dark and moody palette, which can also be useful for depending on whatever tone you want. Kind of goes into why people use it. As well as with the top part, it basically talks about how using different like colors and palettes, like contrasting colors, can basically make a character stand out depending on their skin tone. So far there's pretty good advice in here. Basically, it does just boil down to it just saying experiment with colors. Just see what you can do. To each their own, kind of just try some stuff. And so far the other page goes on about proportion and scale. Basically, it just talks about how the head shape of the character basically can be used to affect like how tall or realistic the character looks. Basically, if you know about proportion, this basically is just kind of a review on that, like a short review. Just little information like that. It also talks about like the line of action, which can also be used to just give your character a bit more like personality in their stance or pose. And the other side of it basically says like try different poses with your character and try like twisting and exaggerating them so you can basically just get a feel for their personality and just basically see how the character looks, so you can just get used to drawing them in different poses. And it also says what makes up a manga style girl. Basically, again, just more advice and everything here as well, such as like the nose, the lips, things like that, so you can just kind of help with your proportion or whatever style you want to go for. And the last part in the techniques is basically the clothing and accessories. So far this page, it basically starts off with going in like traditional Japanese clothing and accessories. So basically just this whole page is a bunch of different terms and basically describing and explaining what these terms mean, what these clothing like pieces were used for, and you know, different like traditions and stuff like that as well. Again, it's interesting to read. Definitely did teach me something about like different articles of clothing and what they were used for. And the page after that basically goes into the fashion subcultures seen in manga, which again is more terms that basically I probably will look up later because A lot of these have no idea what they are or even if they're still a thing. Then under that is basically drawing folds and wrinkles in clothing. So basically just like a very short kind of like rundown on if the clothing's like light or softer, what will the folds kind of be like? If the fabric's kind of heavier, what will the folds be like? Just basically a really small thing just to give you a short rundown. So just very light on the information in that, but again can help lead to other stuff later on if you need it. So far, the second part is basically the cast, which basically this is the part that goes into like the 50 female characters, basically showing off their style, personality traits, and a bunch of other information. So far, I'll just go ahead and run through just like all 50 of them real quick, and then from there, I'll just basically describe like what one of the pages basically has on it. So I'll go ahead and just start reading what it has. So far, to start off the cast, we have Schoolgirl, Princess, French Maid, Catgirl, Ninja, Swordswoman, Assassin, Warrior, Martial Artist, Mecha Pilot, Military, Geisha, Festival Girl, Shinto Bride, Grandma, Temple Maiden, Punk Rocker, Wacky, Hip Hop, Elegant Gothic, Cyborg, Angel, Vampire, Fairy, Witch, Superhero, Beach Babe, Tomboy, Glamour Girl, Geek, Retro Kitsch, Cute Youth, Androgynous, Kindergarten Girl, Mother and Daughter, Flower Maid, Handy Girl, Secretary, Cook, Sportswoman, Pop Idol, Cowgirl, Wrestler, Diva, Teacher, Nurse, Satsuki in the Snow, Little Miss Mitsuki, Dark Elf, and Pixie. Okay, that was a lot of names to go through, but so far we're going to look at just like two of them. Basically just kind of like rolling through the page and see what's up. Basically, look at the first one, the Schoolgirl. Basically, it starts off with like a little personality paragraph where it's like, here's who this character is, here's who they are, what their personality is. Under that is the character details, such as their hair, clothing, accessories, and other kind of details about them. Then under that is more about the color palette. So it basically just shows you the color palette that was used to make the character. Then there's tips on the style, which basically just goes into the art style or the clothing they're wearing. So kind of give like an explanation behind that. And with that, it can kind of go into the history of that just clothing or fashion style or even the art style as well. So it can be very interesting to learn about like that kind of style or that kind of like clothing or that interpretation of it. Then there's the character study, which basically just kind of gives a little summary of what the character looks like. So basically you can just kind of like briefly explain what the character is. And then next to that, just like different drawings of the head, which basically just shows the head in like three different views, just the head-on view, the three-quarter view, and the side view. And then under that, you basically have the line art, adding color, and then adding shading, basically so you can see all the steps of how it was done. You can also just like, because it recommends this too, where it says artist shortcut, you can scan or trace the line art image so you can basically just like work on your coloring. And then next to it is a demo, which basically the demos can vary from character to character, because this one basically talks about the shiny shoes and basically showing how they made the shoes look shiny. But in other ones, it can vary from like how they use markers to make like certain things look right, how they use digital work to make things work out, how they use colored pencils or just like any kind of tool to do what they did. So basically, you can get a lot of information per character. So it is something really to check out for each thing if you're just like kind of curious on how they did something. And so far, if we look at the second one, the princess, is basically the exact same thing. Where again, description of character, character details, tips on the style, the color palette. Except with this one, it looks more like paint palettes. So you can basically just like kind of see how that works out with like paint rather than just a solid color. If somebody used more of like a colored pencil or digital. Then the next page, basically the character study, the head from different views. Then basically same thing, the line art, adding color, adding shading. And then the demo features, where with this one is basically showing like for the skin tone and the hair. So just kind of showing you how to do that. So far, my thoughts on this book is basically the whole book itself is kind of interesting because it does go into a decent amount of information on different kind of materials you can get and use, as well as like it recommends a lot of different brands of stuff to get as well for you to check out. It introduces a lot of terms, give definitions. So far, it is a very fascinating book to look at, especially like again topic wise of all the characters. There's a lot of characters, a lot of different styles. So basically, you can try anything you really want with it as well. So far, if I go off my normal scale of like beginner, intermediate, and advanced, basically with beginner, again, if you're going into this not knowing how to draw at all, you're probably not going to learn a ton. Like, this book isn't going to teach you magically how to draw, but so far, if you're new to coloring, then this book probably is really recommended because, again, it will introduce you to different tools and different methods and techniques that, again, you might want to check out. So if you're new to coloring, then yeah, I can recommend that like pretty well. Intermediate and advanced, again, it can give you different topics to try out. If you're intermediate, for advanced, different styles. So again, just I would recommend it for intermediate and advanced as well. So far, again, just overall, if you're new and have no idea how to draw, might want to look for something else. But if you're looking for something to teach you about new ways to color, then yeah, I absolutely recommend this book and stuff like that as well. So far, this book I ended up getting from Thrift Books again. So I got this book for free because I had like a deal and everything and stuff like that as well. But yeah, I got this book for free. So far, if I look at the tags on here, this book originally belonged to a Goodwill and it was like $5.99. But if you look at the back, at the like original pricing, in the United States, this book is worth $21.99, and in Canada is $24.50. So basically, again, if you can find this book cheap, because technically, if I didn't get the book for free, I would have gotten it for under $7. So again, it's a book where if you can find it for like under $7, I recommend getting it. Or if you can find it pre-owned, get it, check it out, and everything like that. But if you're like going for the full price, again, it won't hurt that much to support them. But again, if you can find it cheaper, I would absolutely just recommend buying it cheaper. But other than that, so far again, this book looks pretty interesting. And again, I won't mind working with it later on. So to myself and everybody else, see you in the next one.